All right. I'm Dustin Seaton. I'm president of Arkansas for Gifted and Talented Education, or AGIT. Thank you all for joining us tonight, Sunday, November the 15th, I believe, tonight at 7 o'clock our time, but I believe it's 8 o'clock Ben's time. We have a special treat tonight. Our District 3 director, Jake Allen, has secured a friend and colleague from Arkansas who's now at the U.S. Election Assistance Commission to do a presentation and Q&A with us, with students, with all those that are Facebook Live, as well as with us live on Zoom. So I encourage you to sit back and relax and feel free to ask questions wherever you are. You don't have to unmute. You don't have to worry about your video, your backdrops, or any of that, because we're using the Zoom webinar feature. So if you'd like, down at the bottom, you can see the Q&A button if you have questions, or you're welcome to make comments in the chat. With us tonight is Benjamin Hovland. He was nominated by President Donald Trump and confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate on January 2nd, 2019 to serve on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, or the EAC. He is a 20-year veteran and career in elections, which have been largely shaped by his commitment to improving election administration and removing barriers to voting. So we're really excited because this is a very timely session. Ben received his BA from the University of Central Arkansas, which is where I got my BA. So go Bears. And he also got his JD from the University of Oregon. So he's a Bear and a Duck fan. So tonight he'll hopefully answer any of your questions from students and other participants about U.S. elections. We also have with us, as I said, District 3 Director of Agate, Jake Allen, who's also the Huntsville GT Coordinator. So with that said, Jake, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dustin. Welcome, Ben, and welcome Facebook Live and the rest of the world. We are pleased to have Ben Hovland here. I've known Ben for a long time, since the mid to late 90s anyway. So Ben, I thought maybe you could give the audience a little bit of background or the function of the Election Assistance Commission, and then later maybe how you got there, how you went from just a humble Eureka Springs boy all the way to the big time in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, happy to. Well, thanks, Jake. Thanks, Dustin. It's great to be here. As a former Arkansas GT student myself, it's good to be back, I guess, virtually. So the United States Election Assistance Commission, we're a small federal agency. We are independent, which means that we do not directly report to the president, even though the president nominates us. And we're bipartisan, which means that we have an equal split of party representation. And so everything we have to do, we either agree on it or we don't do it, basically. But we were created by legislation called the Help America Vote Act, which was passed by Congress after the 2000 election, which most the kids watching this, maybe some of even their parents are too young to remember. No, it wasn't that long ago, but 20 years ago now. And so that was a closely contested election where Florida, a few hundred votes in Florida determined who would be the president in 2000. And certainly that was a big deal. And Congress was looking at how they could invest more in elections, how they could do more around elections. And so they wrote a bill that helped replace a bunch of voting equipment and also created our agency to study elections. And each state runs elections its own way. We have people say they're decentralized elections, but all 50 states run their elections a little bit differently. And so our job at the EAC is sort of to study that and keep track of it. We do something called the Election Administration and Voting Survey, which is a huge survey. It's the only national survey of its kind, and it gets real data from each state about how Americans get registered to vote, how they participate in the process. And that really allows us to compare states and figure out what's working, what's not, how different options can make a difference. One way that was really cool this year, there's some states, particularly in the Western United States, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, who had transitioned to mostly voting through the mail. And with the pandemic this year, more people wanted to vote that way because they felt more comfortable voting that way. And so we were able to get information from those states who'd been doing it for a while and share that across the country to help people run their elections as smoothly as they could, given all the challenges this year. And so essentially, just a quick rundown of the big things we do. So we serve as we call it a federal clearinghouse, but it's essentially that we keep track of the different ways people run elections. Congress also sends grant money through us to the states. So in the last about 2.5 years, we've given out $1.2 billion, which is a decent chunk of change. We did about 800 million of that this year. And we test and certify voting machines. And so the voting equipment that people vote on, we have standards that those are tested to. We have laboratories that test those. And that's certainly part of our job as well.
And it's been in the news a little bit lately. In fact, I posted a link to your appearance on CNN from the other day, but I know you've also appeared on Fox News and Today Show or something. Anyway, you made the circuit of the media outlets. Have they had any pressing questions for you?
Certainly, there's a lot of conversations about what did and didn't happen in this year's election. Unfortunately, there are a lot of rumors and a lot of sort of myths out there. It's funny, like there's, on both sides of the aisle, certainly you can pick different years. There's a certain amount of the population that doesn't want to trust the outcome of our elections, but for people like me who study it or work in this space, for your local county clerks that run elections, or again, because it varies in each state, it may be some places it's your county auditor, it's different positions, but they're all run at the local level. And if you talk to those people across the country, they have a lot of faith in our elections because they know all the checks and balances that are there. The people that work in the polling place are called poll workers. And if you've ever, I've done that a number of times, and certainly even doing that, you realize, oh, I work in a bipartisan team. Oh, we're checking to make sure that all of the ballots that we started the day with and add up to all the ones we have at the end of the day. Or you've got these security tape that, where if you peel it, you can tell, and you're writing down those numbers. There are all these security measures throughout the entire process of elections. Frankly, probably because of years of people being worried the other side is going to cheat. But as a result, you have tons and tons of security measures in place that make sure that it's very hard to. Occasionally people do, and they get caught, and sadly they get, usually they get prosecuted, and it's a sad story. But so kids don't break the law.
How does a guy from Arkansas get on the radar for anybody in DC, especially to get an appointment from the president to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission?
So my path here was, so Eureka Springs is up on the border. After college, I moved up to Missouri and worked up there for a little while in politics. I ended up working for the Missouri Secretary of State's office, and similar, Missouri and Arkansas are similar. The Secretary of State is the chief election official for the state. And so I worked in elections there for a few years, and then decided for a change of scenery and moved out to DC and was working on sort of voting rights for a while, making sure that people were able to vote, and then got a job at the US Senate. And I worked for the US Senate Committee on Rules and Administration for about 5.5 years. And the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration has jurisdiction over a lot of things, actually: the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, the U.S. Botanical Garden. But the piece of the pie that is legislative, where you work on legislation for members of the Senate, relates to how elections are run or election administration, and campaign finance, or money in politics, essentially. And so I worked on those issues for about 5.5 years in the Senate. And one of my responsibilities was also doing oversight, where Congress keeps an eye on agencies, and the U.S. Election Assistance Commission was one of those. So I was pretty familiar with the agency, and there was an opening and a need, and I was asked if I would be willing to do it. And that's how I ended up here.
Well, so being a former Arkansan and a gifted and talented student, do you feel, what kind of experiences in your gifted program helped kind of lead you this way, or helped you achieve these goals anyway?
Well, I will admit that it's a bit hard to remember at this point. It's been a couple years. But, you know, actually, I stumbled across some old stuff that my mom had kept, and you know, it was funny. I saw this like 5th grade report that you know, that I had to do on it was like current events in the news, and I think I done it on Ollie North and the Iran-Contra affair. And I don't remember it at all, but I do remember that sense of, you know, I definitely remember having projects where, you know, you looked at the news, you did reports about current events and what was happening in the world, and just really thinking about that. You know, certainly for what I do, or you know, working around voting, working at the U.S. Senate, working at this commission, there is a lot of civics that can be learned. You know, there's a lot that's involved in our government. You know, most people are familiar with the Schoolhouse Rock version and the 3 branches piece of it and all that. There's really a lot of cool stuff and a lot of cool history if you're into that, but also just these things that impact your life. And that ranges, you know, a lot of people, I think, focus on the federal government, but really, I mean, your local government makes a big deal in your day-to-day life, as far as you know, what the status of your roads are, or you know, various local issues. It's a big deal who represents you in those local offices. And so certainly for anyone that's got an inclination toward it, I think reading up on current events, thinking about the different ways that decisions of elected officials impact your lives, you know, is certainly a good place to start.
Where do you see the future of our elections going? Because I know a lot of states for the first time ever had a large number of absentee ballots. There's talks of same-day registration and things like that. Where do you see the future of U.S. elections going next?
So when we look back, I mentioned the Election Administration and Voting Survey. When we've looked at that over time, as people get exposed to, there's a phrase that's convenience voting options. Essentially, that ties together no excuse absentee or mail ballots and early in-person voting. So just being able to vote on election day. And as people get exposed to that, they like it. They want to do it more. And so we see this trend over time, where each year that's been growing. I suspect that because of the pandemic this year, you know, so 2016, you had about 1/4 of Americans vote by mail. I think this year it's going to be closer to 50%, which I suspect will be a high watermark for a while. But I think 2022 and 2024 will be much higher than 2016 or 2018, just because you had so many people use it for the first time and found it convenient. You know, did they get the experience of sitting at their kitchen table and reviewing ballot questions or ballot initiatives, where you know, sometimes those take a little longer to read, or actually, I used to write those at the Secretary of State's office, and I know sometimes they're not easy to read. So people might have wanted to look it up on the internet and see, hey, what's this all about? And that's something that's a lot easier to do with a mail ballot. And so a lot of people like that. You know, the reason, this is a strange fun fact, but the reason that, so election day, our general elections, are the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And that dates back to legislation a long, long time ago, and that has been the traditional election day. But it was that Tuesday because Sunday was church, Monday you could travel, Tuesday you could be in your county seat, and Wednesday was market day. And so it was for our, for an agrarian society, where everybody were farmers, and that was when they were taking their stuff to market or whatever it was, and it worked for the time. And now, a lot of people work on Tuesday. It's not the best option, and so you see expansion of early voting. You see people who, maybe the weekend is better for them, and one of the things that we've learned. We see lines on election day. Sometimes people who are in line during early voting are much happier than people that are in line on election day, because they can sort of plan their day out and say, oh, well, I've got time, it's Saturday, or whatever it is. Maybe it's a Thursday is good for you, but Tuesday isn't. And so, certainly, I think that will continue to expand over time, and certainly. A lot of the states that haven't had as much of it, now that voters have had a little bit of an experience with that this year, I think they'll ask for it. They'll want it.
And also in the news is the many challenges to the various election counts and whatnot. I know people have probably been keeping up with it on Google, but do you have any particular insights for us that we may not see on the news about the process or any of that?
I would reiterate that there are just a real large amount of safeguards in place. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of conspiracy theories floating around about, this or that. And the reality is, would be, it frankly doesn't even make sense. Like the people that run elections, again, your county clerk, your local election officials, number one, those folks live and work in communities all across the country. There are nearly 9,000 jurisdictions. So that alone creates all kinds of difficulty. But they're also just, they're great people. They don't do the job to get rich. They don't do the job. They do it because they care about serving the public, and they have pride in their work. They care about the election being fair and accurate more than anybody, and so again, I've traveled all over the country and talked to so many of these folks. I've been at their conferences, I've been at their offices, and they're some of the greatest people you'll ever meet. They just care about our country. They care about our elections and making them fair, and they did a great job this year. So many of them put their own health on the line running this election during a pandemic, while a lot of people were able to work from home or do something like that. These folks had to be in there training poll workers, figuring out how they were going to make polling places safe for voters. And they did a great job this year, and they should get credit for it.
There was a lot of concern about the number of poll workers that would be available, especially since poll workers are usually retirees and people who would be at higher risk of catching the coronavirus or being exposed to the coronavirus. But I understand there was a wave of support, people that help kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah, that was one of the things certainly I was most proud of that we were able to do this year. For the first time ever, we launched something called National Poll Worker Recruitment Day, which had never been done at the federal level. Again, recruiting poll workers is a very local thing. Sometimes states will help out. And this year, a lot of states did some great programs. There was, in North Carolina, they had this Democracy Heroes campaign. Michigan did a Democracy MVP campaign that was real cool. They got all the sports teams involved. And so we did National Poll Worker Recruitment Day, and so many companies pitched in, sports teams pitched in, celebrities. Trevor Noah was talking about poll workers. It was really cool. One of the ones that I liked a lot was called the Poll Hero Project. That was a group of students that were recruiting high school and college kids to serve as poll workers, usually for the first time. Not every state allows high school poll workers, but a lot do. Some people, even if you're not old enough to vote yet, you can serve as a poll worker. And just for those people that aren't familiar with it, poll workers, so you have, your election day, you've got your voting booth, and the people that work there that day, those are essentially volunteers. You do get paid, but it's, temporary work. And so, we go from having, I mentioned there's about 9,000 jurisdictions around the country. Most of those are at the county level, but some places it's at the city level, just depending on how they're structured. But there's about 200,000 polling places across the country and about 1 million poll workers. And so that's not, and that's for a general election, but that's not people that you've got on staff by any means. So it's really this volunteer citizens who help their community be able to vote, be able to participate. It's a really cool experience. I've done it a number of times and always really enjoyed it because, sometimes I think people correlate elections and politics a lot because they're related, but I think of a lot of people talk about politics and they use an analogy to a horse race. And candidate A is ahead of candidate B or something like that. And to use that analogy, again, election administration gets tied up in it, but election administration isn't about politics. It's about making sure that things are fair. And so I say if politics is a horse race, election administration is the track. The track's got to be in good shape. It's got to be taken care of so that the horses can run. And so again, the people that do that, the people that work as election officials or then poll workers, what your job is about really, it's not about who someone's going to vote for. It's simply about helping your fellow citizens, your fellow Americans participate in the process and vote and making that a good experience for them. It's very much it's like a customer service facing job. You get to be the customer service representative of our democracy. And so, when I've done it, I've had 18-year-olds come in who are a little bit nervous. They don't exactly know what they're doing. And you say, hey, you got it. This is easy. Here's where you go. This is what you do. And you drop the ballot over there. And then I've had senior citizens who have been voting longer than I've been alive. And maybe they need a little extra help. And you give that to them and you thank them for coming out. And you give them an I voted sticker. Surprisingly, everyone really, really loves, even if you get older, you love stickers, apparently. But again, you make it a good experience for them. You make them proud to have voted, proud to have made their voice heard, and have their voice be part of this system, part of our democracy. The Constitution starts, we the people. That's where we come in. We get to vote. So it's cool.
We had our first comment on Facebook about from Amanda. So Amanda, thank you. We had many college students in her hometown or her area work as poll workers because they are home being college students doing virtual learning. Do y'all keep data from the U.S. Elections Assistance on the demographics of poll workers or anything like that?
We do. And so it'll be interesting to see what happened this year. We know that in past years, the majority of poll workers are over age 60. That was one of the reasons that we saw a lot of dropout during the primaries this year was your traditional poll worker was in a lot of those higher risk categories for complications with COVID. And so we saw stories, we've heard a lot of anecdotal stories. We'll have the data. It takes a while to collect it from all the states, but probably in about 6 months we'll have it and know what that looks like. But again, I'm very excited that a lot of what we've seen preliminarily seems like a new generation of people stepped up, and that's going to be important. We from our survey know that in 2018, when there wasn't a pandemic, about 70% of jurisdictions had at least some difficulty finding enough poll workers. And so, if some of these college students had an experience like mine and they want to keep doing it, plus you get a little bit of money, which you can use, you get, it varies a little bit, but probably at least $100 or $150, something like that. And again, since I'm going to sell this to future poll workers here, primary and the general election, there's municipal elections, you could probably over the course of a year, make $1,000. So, hey, it's worth it. Again, worth considering. It's a great experience, but I'm hopeful that a lot of those college students will have had an experience similar to mine and thought, hey, this was cool. This was great helping out my community. And again, it'll be something that they look to keep doing. One of the things we learned in starting the National Poll Worker Recruitment Day effort was that so many people didn't know that that was something they could even do. They just, that's, oh, well, either people thought, this is something that these are people that work for the office, maybe, maybe that was something grandma did. But again, it was so great to have people step up and sign up this year. And I'm hoping that one of the real silver linings out of this election is that we'll have a new generation of poll workers who will make elections better in 2022 and 2024 and so on. Fingers crossed on that, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Nice. So do you think you're going to get an invite to the inauguration?
I don't know. And I will say, I don't know what it's going to look like this year. It's, with the pandemic, I don't think it's going to look like it does. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Certainly, in years past, there's a lot of people there. It's not probably an ideal event for the times that we're living in, but, we will see.
Well, if you get an extra ticket, give me a call, okay?
And we know there's still elections happening. So, but in terms of your role, do you do the majority of your job before the elections, on election day, or even post-election?
Most of it is before election day, and really, I mean, this year obviously had its own unique challenges. So the election, a lot of people think election officials, and here I'm mostly talking about state and locals, but primarily locals. People think about, oh, well, it must be a good job. You only have an election every couple of years. But one, that's totally not true. Two, most local election officials have a bunch of other jobs. In a few states, they only do elections, but in most states, you also do like marriage licenses and maybe you're the land recorder as well. So there's different duties as well. But then the other part is, as I mentioned, there's municipal elections, there's primary elections, there's a lot of elections happening, but most of the work that you ever want to do, if you ever want to change anything, you don't want to have, as an election official, ideally you will have any major changes done before a lower turnout election. I wish that all Americans wanted to vote in every election, but the reality is some of your local races, et cetera, you might have a 10 or 15% turnout. And that's a really good time to try new voting equipment, for example, to work out anything that you need to work out. Certainly, that highest pressure election is the presidential election year. And so, you don't want to be putting too many new procedures in place for a presidential election year. And so as far as my job, that also means, helping support election officials when they're doing that work. So, as people are looking at, or state legislatures or whoever, as they go, we used mail and absentee or early voting earlier. There's a bunch of people who go, hey, we had to process a lot of paperwork. We got a lot of mail this year because some states require you to mail a request for your absentee ballot. whereas other states, you can just do that online. And so there may be a bunch of states that go, hey, we should build an online request system so that we don't have to key all that stuff in. We don't have to open all those envelopes. That's going to save us time. It's going to save us money. And so that might be something, if people weren't able to implement that last year, they go, wow, that was a lot of mail. let's fix that here on the back end. And so maybe they're doing that programming or looking to do that, in January or February or next year so that they're ready for the next big election.
Well, I'm checking Facebook to make sure we don't have any other questions there. And again, anybody that's watching on Zoom or Facebook, feel free to ask in some questions. The only other quick question I had would be, we know that the Georgia Senate runoff is in January. Are there any other big elections or other elections throughout the state that are in runoff elections that your office or your commission would be assisting with nationwide?
That's the biggest federal one that jumps to mind. Louisiana also has a runoff system. I saw their Secretary of State had put something out about the registration deadline for that. I honestly, this is embarrassing, but keeping track of 50 states can be hard at sometimes. I'm not exactly sure who they've got in that runoff there. I don't know if it's federal or just state folks. I probably should know, but I'll look into it after this. That is, I mentioned earlier, the 50 states run elections 50 different ways. And one, it keeps you busy keeping track of it because it's interesting, but there's only a handful of states that have a setup that leads to that runoff or leads to, particularly a post-November runoff. Some people, so what Louisiana does and what is sort of like what California does, except California does it at their primary election, so early in the year, and then they have their final candidates on the November. Louisiana does it at the November, and then they put the final candidates after that. And so, again, it's interesting to see the different ways people have done this. I get asked a lot actually about, if we should run elections more similarly across the country. And over the course of my career, I've sort of, I've done a lot of thinking about it and probably spun around a few different times and in my thinking about it. Usually what you see is federal legislation around elections is pretty rare, and it tends to provide floors and ensure voting rights, make sure that people are allowed to vote, make sure that they're not being discriminated against. But one of the nice things about the states doing different ways is that it really does allow for some innovation to happen. Things that, actually right now we're talking a lot about election security. Well, one of the ways that we have confidence in the outcome of elections is something called a post-election audit or a post-election tabulation audit. And that's essentially where you spot check a certain number of ballots and different people. And this is happening right now in Georgia. That's, if you're watching the news about what's happening in Georgia, that's what's happening. And different people do it different ways, again, in each state. A lot of states have historically had something called a fixed percentage audit. And I know this is going to get pretty boring. Essentially, what it would say is you take, 5% of the ballots or 1% of the ballots or whatever, and you check those and you spot check it. And if everything looks good, good. If not, then maybe you look into it a little more. Colorado, again, talking about how different states can create new things, Colorado pioneered something called a risk limiting audit. And that's a sort of ridiculous technical term. But essentially what it means is it is an audit that's on a sliding scale. And that makes sense when you think about it. What it means is if your race is really, if it's not close, if a candidate wins or loses by 20%, let's say, you probably only need to check like 20 or 30 ballots in a whole state to know that it's right. But if you're in a situation like Georgia and the margin is pretty small, then you have to check a larger amount, if not all of the ballots. But so again, you're not wasting your time on checking races that it's statistically clear right away who the winner was. You're focusing it on those ones that people are more interested in or closer. And so if that was dependent on federal legislation, we might not have that anywhere yet, but Colorado pioneered it, and Rhode Island adopted it, and Virginia did, and Georgia did, and it's sort of spreading around the country. In a similar fashion, online voter registration. People want to register online, and it saves states a lot of money, actually. That started in Arizona, and then it went to Washington, and now 40 states have it. It's just one of those things. That tends to be how elections change. There'll be a state or two that try something out, and it works, and the voters like it, or if it saves money, that's sort of the magic recipe for it to start moving around the country.
We did get a question coming in from Facebook. So given your 20 years experience with elections in the United States, is there one state or a few states that are doing it right that you would recommend other states to model off of or look to as an example?
Again, I think some of it depends a bit on, each state has a little different history, has a little different experience. Some of what there was a bunch of fighting in the spring about people ramping up to full vote by mail really quickly, and that just realistically wasn't going to work for everybody in the time frame. The states that did that out west, Oregon and Washington, they took years or decades to do it, and part of that is getting voters accustomed to that option. One that I've liked, Colorado has created a model that has a lot of options. And I think they have a very high turnout. They have very high participation. What they do is they mail everybody a ballot. So they get considered to be a vote by mail state. But then they maintain what are called vote centers, which are essentially polling places, but not like a neighborhood polling place. So in a lot of places, you have to go to a specific polling place, like in your neighborhood. Whereas vote centers can be your whole county. And then, so essentially, if there's one by your house, great. If there's one by your job, great, you can go wherever. And so with Colorado, you get your ballot in the mail, and you could mail it back if you want, put it in a drop box if you want, or you can take it to the polling place if you want that feeling. A lot of people like to have that experience of standing there with their neighbors or other citizens and have that sort of civic pride of engaging in the act of voting publicly. And so, again, I think that model that Colorado's done is a nice one to give people options. I think that was really, in a lot of ways, the story of this year, or this year's election was giving people options. Again, it was a little different because of the pandemic, but how they felt the most comfortable voting, the most, how they felt safe or were, did they want to vote by mail or absentee? Did they feel good about that? Did they want to vote early in person? Where, we were able to see the vote get spread out. In a normal year, we would have had when you look back historically, about a third of people vote before Election Day and 2/3 voted on Election Day. Well, this year that was reversed. 2/3 of Americans voted in advance of Election Day and about a third voted on Election Day. And I think that helped limit congestion in polling places, that helped limit lines. And all those things are important to keep voters and poll workers as safe as possible. And so I think anything that gives people those options is important. We want people to be able to vote. We want people to participate. And so if they have options on how to do it, I think that's a good idea.
Do you and this is just a point of information on my end, do you often go to legislatures and testify or give your expertise in form of like committees in terms of states that are looking at reforming their election law? Or do you more predominantly work with like the Secretary of State's offices in the various states when you're looking at best practices for elections?
I would say, I mean, our primary interaction that way is with the election officials or state chief election officials. So the state, the secretaries of state or state election directors. But it isn't uncommon for my colleagues or I to speak sometimes with state legislatures. Again, usually it's informationally or educationally. We have, and that's the same with Congress as well. We have limitations that keep us from lobbying, but we're able to provide technical assistance and technical expertise. And so again, if people ask us about, either statistics about how things have done or to help with, technical advice on how something should be worded, or, if they say, well, this is what we want to do, and say, well, this is what that would look like, or review. Sometimes we get sent legislation to look at, and somebody say, we're trying to do this. Does this do that? And we can say, yes, it does, or we think you want to do this actually. So it keeps it interesting, and again, it's interesting to see the different ways people come up with to run our elections and help people participate.
Well, so since this is Arkansans for Gifted and Talented Ed, and hopefully some parents and students are going to be watching this, what words of wisdom, Ben, do you have for all the gifted kids out there in Arkansas? Life advice, some life lesson you picked up along the way.
Ooh, it's a lot of pressure. This is the future of America.
That's right.
Study up, kids. I don't know. I think it's, I will say, looking at my own experience, I was, sometimes you just stumble into things, and I don't think that's good advice, but, keep an eye out for things that you like. I never thought I would end up sort of in this job, and I kind of happened across it and I've really enjoyed it. I find a lot of value and a lot of meaning in getting to help people participate. Again, to me, this is the core of who we are as a country. This is the core of our democracy. And, certainly in any of these roles that I've had, I feel good when, when I was at the Secretary of State's office, we created a program that helped people get registered to vote. When I was in Congress, I helped get a bunch of money to make our elections more secure. And, certainly in this role, I feel like I've had an impact which has helped people to participate in the process, hopefully help people feel good about the process. And certainly, that's a nice thing to be able to say.
Well, Mr. Hovland, thank you for giving us your Sunday night. I know it's past bedtime routines for a lot of us, but thank you all for tuning in for Zoom, and for those that are on Facebook Live. I don't see any other questions, but if we have any other follow-up questions, do you care if we emailed them to you?
Absolutely. Please do. I'm happy to answer.
Well, thank you for all you're doing professionally for our country. I mean, I think elections is vitally important. It's what makes our democracy so strong and great. But definitely thank you for giving us your time and answering questions from our participants. And we will be sharing this out again with other teachers and students throughout the rest of the year.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, when you're old enough, get registered, and vote.
There you go.
Absolutely. The civic teacher and all of us. Have a good evening.
You too.
Good night.